for Birmingham, made for Birmingham. This is
Switch Radio Breakfast with me, Ben Ellis, on this Tuesday morning. The story doing the rounds, it's dominating the headlines in the region, is the passing of the greatest player to ever play for Birmingham City, Trevor Francis, at the age of 69. Tributes have been pouring in the last 24 hours or so, and we're going to get the thoughts now of somebody who professionally watched and reported on Trevor playing for Blues, the former chief football reporter at the Sports Argus here in the West Midlands, Peter White, known to his friends as Pedro, joins me on the line right now. Pedro, a very sad day.
A very sad day indeed, Ben. I mean, I was absolutely stunned when I saw the news. I think the whole footballing world was. You know, Trevor was one of those guys that, you know, it sounds awful, but you could see. It seems he could go on forever. He was an unbelievable guy, you know, and it's a very, very sad loss to football in particular, but you know, to everybody who knew him.
We've been hearing from fans, obviously, who are feeling this loss of their favourite player of all time, and we can understand and appreciate how that feels. But from your point of view, Pedro, what was it like watching Trevor Francis in almost a kind of a analytical way when you've got to report on what he's doing?
Well, I had two spells working as a journalist with Trevor, man. The first one was when he was a player at Birmingham City, and I was chief reporter of the Sports Argus. And then obviously a few years later when he became Blues manager, and I was working as a freelance for a couple of national newspapers. But on the first occasion, when he was a player, I found him a pure genius on the pitch and a true gent off it. I mean, he was only 16, wasn't he, when he made his debut? And then he scored those famous 4 goals in one game. And, you know, he was unbelievable. But I mean, moving on to when he moved to Nottingham Forest, you know, he was a trailblazer there. But the way he conducted himself, but the way he actually played, I mean, there was much more about Trevor than being a goal scorer. I mean, Blues fans will probably recall he used to run down the right flank and he was going at full pelt, and he would somehow get his right foot round the ball and cross it at 90 degrees. And he was still running towards the goal line. It really was. It was quite unbelievable. He's the only player, I can honestly say that, he's the only player I've ever seen who was capable of doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, the only one I can compare to this in recent times on a local level with the loss of a revered footballer would be when we lost Cyril Regis about 5 years ago.
Yes.
It's in that mould, isn't it? Where you know and when you think the story's doing the rounds at the moment, the transfer fee that Kylian Mbappe is going for,
yes.
Trevor Francis is like the first £1 million player. It's impossible to put a number on it, but what would you think he'd be worth today?
Well, it'd certainly be worth. I mean, what would Jack Grealish went for 100 million, didn't he? I mean, it certainly, you know, and they're talking about 115, are they, for what's his name, Rice, who's just moving, and you know, I mean, you've got to put Trevor right up there. You've got to put right up there, mate, among the very best of that era. He was undoubtedly one of the best players I ever saw, and there were some very good ones around at that time, but he was right up there among the best.
And to put into context as well, like the bad pitches and the heavy boots and the tough tackles as well, you know, compared to football that you see today, almost a different game.
It was, yeah. I mean, you just looked at George Best, who managed to master it, and Trevor was similar. I don't think the pitches was quite as bad when Trevor played than when Bestie played, was in his prime. But I mean, he mastered the game, and you know, it was just pure genius that was unfolding in front of you. To be perfectly honest, that's all I can say. You know, but he was off the pitch. He was such a genuine guy. He was so, you know, the first, you know. When when I worked for the Evening Mail and the Argus, I've probably told you before, one of our jobs before players went off training, we tried to get a player from each club, each Midlands club, on their landline, no mobiles in those days, before they went training to have a word with them. Trevor's phone had a call intercept, so you were put through to an operator, a real person, not a computer, who asked you who you were and who you were calling. Then the line went quiet for a little minute, and as she spoke to Trevor, and I can never remember one occasion when he didn't take my call. He was always very, very helpful to all reporters and made our jobs a lot easier. But on the pitch, he was among the very best.
Absolutely. And to put that into context, working in the media now, when I cover football, you know, you've got to go around the houses, you've got to go through press offices. It's got to be a lot of emails bouncing back and forth just to get a one line quote. And you know, it's a different world.
It is. It is definitely a different world, and that's why probably, you know, people like Trevor Francis, Andy Gray, when he went for 1.5 million. You know, he was one of those people that I think he appreciated the press. He knew, but the other thing, he was friendly with the press, you know, and he was always most helpful. And you can't even get near journalists these days. Sorry, you can't even get near journalists. Can't even get near players these days. Really, you know, you have to, like you say, send everything in triplicate and hope for the best.
Absolutely, I find that the parallel interesting, Pedro, and obviously this is a chat about a blues legend. But if you take two teenagers from opposite ends of England in the early 70s who travel to Birmingham, both wear a number 8 shirt. I'm talking obviously Brian Little, Aston Villa, and Trevor Francis at Birmingham City, and then 25 years later they're both managing those respective clubs. That must have been an interesting time for you as well, covering it.
Right, exactly, yeah. I mean, I thought Brian wrote a very poignant piece on his Twitter account today. He said, a rival on the pitch, but a friend off it, because that's how it was. You know, he was a rival. There were two very, very good players. They were rivals, but in those days, you know, because a lot of people were from Birmingham, I know neither of those were actually from Birmingham, but it was just a close-knit community. And, you know, believe it or not, Blues, Villa, Albion and Wolves players always got on well with one another. They
did, and you know, it's all written in books, and they do the forums together and charity golf days, and what have you, and it's all very sad. I made a list yesterday, Pedro, when I was looking at this, and it's like Billy Wright, Jeff Astle, Cyril Regis, Dalian Atkinson, Hugo Echiag, and added sort of Trevor Francis to it. You know, across all the big Midlands clubs who played their best football on this patch and left their mark and forged a bond between player and supporter that the way football is now is getting weaker and weaker as each season goes by. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it has. It's a lot of football's lost its soul, I'm afraid. You know, when you're talking about £259 million for one player who's not even going into a proper football team, if you know what I mean, with all due respect to the Middle East. But, you know, it's just changed so much. And I was very, very fortunate that I worked in the Midlands in the era of Trevor, of Andy, obviously, Andy Gray, of Brian Little in particular. And, you know, I was very fortunate. But just one little thing that did disappoint me about Blues, when the day it was announced that Trevor had signed for Forest, or was going to sign for Forest, I went up to St Andrews, and I was very surprised that there was not one member of the Blues board or staff, including the manager, who was there to see him off. And I always thought he deserved much better than that. Was that Kym Smith?
Incredible service to the club. Kym Smith. Yeah. Even Jim there. Well, it wasn't there. But,
that is sad. Yeah, that is sad.
And also the thing that surprised me is that Trevor only won 52 England caps. I mean, in these days, he would have, well, because it's sort of internationals, 55 a season, it feels like. You know, he'd reached the 100 mark because he was a bit special.
Yeah. And when you think England didn't qualify for 74 or 78, and you think what a missed opportunity for a lot of players that would have been.
Yeah. But he was also in the running to go to the 86, and they didn't pick him. Wow. In Mexico, he was still around in 86, and they didn't pick him. So,
and the biggest memories of him coming to Birmingham City as a manager, the playoff semi-finals, definitely. And I say this as a Villa fan, the League Cup final in 2001 where they were robbed, and
Yes.
that image of him crying his eyes out with Andy Johnson on the pitch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, Trevor was Birmingham City. I mean, he went to a lot of other clubs. He managed other clubs, but Trevor's heart and soul was in Birmingham City, without a shadow of a doubt. And it hurt that I don't think he was the success that he hoped he would be. But again, he was so helpful to the press. I mean, I think he learned a lot when he left St Andrews to when he came back. But having grown up with us, a lot of journalists, I think he trusted us and treated us accordingly. And he was exactly the same guy. You know, he would no airs and graces because, oh yes, I'm now the manager. He was still the same Trevor Francis, which, you know, I think is testament to what was Trevor Francis.
And we've asked this a couple of times on the show. What would you like both the immediate tribute and the lasting tributes from the club for Trevor Francis to be?
Well, the immediate tribute, I mean, they've got to sort of realise just what he did for that football club. I mean, in the fullness of time, in the next couple of days, it will probably sink in. I think it still comes as a shock that we can't quite believe what's actually happened, Ben, to be perfectly honest. You know, it's almost like we're talking about the guy, well, we wish he was still alive, but it's like that. They've got to sit down and think something. Trevor deserves something, you know. I mean, there's a lot of bronze statues around outside football grounds these days. Well, you know, if you look at anybody who did, I think, more than many people for Birmingham City, then it was Trevor Francis, and he should be remembered accordingly.
Absolutely, I would think a statue or the gates outside the Kop in the car park there. There's obviously a lot of work going on still at the stadium. If you could name a stand, but I think in the immediate short term, Pedro, I don't see why they couldn't retire the number 8 shirt. I mean, they did for Jude Bellingham when he left. You know, obviously that was under a different ownership, but I would do that if I was Blues. I'd seriously consider that.
Yes, I hear where you're coming from, but I think that's a bit gimmicky. When they did Bellingham, I think that was a bit gimmicky. I just think that, you know, Trevor should be remembered. I'm sure the fans tonight, you know, will remember Trevor, and, you know, or today rather, will remember Trevor, and tonight might have a pint in his memory and things like that. And, you know, he does deserve to be recognised for what he's done for Birmingham City, because in my time covering Birmingham City, which went on for probably from about 76, 77 through to 2000, on and off, I mean, I never saw the like of him. Perhaps Frank Worthington was a good footballer, perhaps Kym Smith was a good manager, but there was only one Trevor Francis.
Well said. Pedro White, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show.
All right, mate. Thanks a lot.
This is
Switch Radio Breakfast, Tuesday morning, a very sad day in the city of Birmingham, no doubt about it. A legend has departed who made his name on the turf at St Andrews for 8 years in the 1970s before going on to become Britain's first £1 million footballer. But of course, we're talking about Trevor Francis, who has passed away at the age of 69. Somebody who would have seen plenty of him back in the day, who has been on this show before and commentates on Birmingham City's home games for BHBN Radio. It's my friend Kym Smith. Hi, Kym.
Hi, Ben. How you doing?
I'm as okay as I can be. It's obviously a very sad time.
It's and very unexpected as well, because these days 69 is no age at all.
Not at all, no. I mean, if we could just go through sort of stages yesterday, it was doing the rounds early afternoon on social media that something was up, but it wasn't kind of verified by the major sort of news outlets. I feel bad for saying, I thought somebody was playing a sick joke on social media. Yeah. But no, it turned out to be the case, and Trevor Francis has passed away. Can you, as a fan, can you remember the the first time you saw him play, or is there any one particular time that stood out when you watched him?
Oh, right. Well, I was a kid back then, so my memories are probably a bit hazy, but obviously he was one of Birmingham's really notable forward three of Hatton, Latchford and Francis, who definitely worked the forward line extremely well. But I think the thing about Francis was that he showed us all the art of clinical finishing, because he was one of those people who could be in the right place at the right time. And also he had the footballing brain and the skill and the agility to be able to do something with it when he saw a chance.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw a lot of footage yesterday as the tributes were being paid. I think there was a goal against QPR that he scored. He picked up the ball in the corner of the box, run rings around Frank McClintock and drilled it low into the net in front of the old railway stand at St Andrews. I mean, that goal stands out for sure. So I noticed Blues fans were saying in their tributes yesterday, once he'd left the club and gone to Nottingham Forest and become the first ever £1 million footballer and scored the winning goal in the '79 European Cup final for Forest, there was an outpouring of joy from Blues fans, similar to what we saw when they saw Jude Bellingham playing in the World Cup for England. You know, is that kind of, he was our boy, and he's gone on to do such great things. And do you know what it got me thinking of in modern terms? It got me thinking of Harry Kane, because you know, there's always this talk about Harry Kane. Should he leave Spurs? Should he go and win something? Should he go and win a trophy? He's a legend at Spurs. If he leaves Spurs, his legacy will be tainted. Spurs fans will think less of him. And I think, well, Blues fans didn't when Trevor Francis went off and won a European Cup. They still held him close to their hearts. So, you know, is that the difference that we're seeing now, Kym, in modern football compared to back then? In that the bond between the footballer and the supporter is now weaker than it's ever been because of just the way football is now?
Oh, I think that there may be a degree of that. Although, having said that, there are a lot of Blues fans who still very closely follow Jude Bellingham's career, despite the fact he left at such a young age. I think sometimes when a player stands out because they are so accomplished, the usual tribalisms don't seem to work in quite the same way. But no, I know what you mean about the Harry Kane thing and what Spurs players would think if he went and played for, I don't know, Bayern Munich or something like that. Yeah, it's an interesting one, but I think it's the sort of thing that doesn't happen very often, and I remember when Forest won the European Cup and thinking, blimey, it was our Trevor scored the winner.
Yeah.
Because I think because he was so young when he came to us, he was still a schoolboy, and he spent more time at Blues than he did at any other club. So I think because of that, he was very much viewed as one of our own.
Yeah.
In the same way that Jude Bellingham is, because he came to the club when he was, very young. I mean, he was about 8.
Yeah.
And then, he was still a teenager when he left us.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's because he'd been around the club such a long time. If he'd only been there a couple of years and then moved on, I don't think it would have been quite the same.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a day. As I say, we all know which team I support. I mean, the parallels would probably be similar at the time in a teenager coming from somewhere else in the country up to Birmingham to ply their trade as a footballer. I mean, I would probably think Brian Little at Villa.
Yeah.
both number eights for the kind of two clubs, both supremely talented. Brian Little's career was sadly cut short through injury when Villa were just on the verge of achieving titles and European Cups. You know, but we're seeing kind of less of that now as well. And the parallel between Little and Trevor Francis, that when Trevor Francis came back to manage Birmingham City, Brian Little was the manager of Aston Villa. So there's always those kind of nice parallels. As I've often said about people who come to play in the Midlands, that they leave their mark, but the Midlands kind of stays with them as well.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And another Villa one, Thomas Hitzelsberger.
Yeah.
Who obviously wasn't born here, but despite the fact he was, he'd been born and brought up in Germany, he spoke English with a Birmingham accent.
I love that. Tommy Hitzelsberger's Brummie accent is just awesome. That's right. Just quickly, because we are pushed for time, but it is a sad day. As a fan, what would you like the ultimate Trevor Francis tribute to be at Birmingham City?
I've noticed there's been quite a lot of chat on social media already, but I'm sure we've got a stand, could be called the Trevor Francis stand.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a good tribute. And I'm sure for Blues' first home game on the 12th of August, they will roll out a very good tribute to him.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for us to say what they're going to do here, but a statue would be what a lot of people would want. You could rename those gates outside the cop in the car park there, I suppose. But one thing they could do very quickly, because those kind of things would take time, they could actually retire the number 8 shirt, and I think that would be a good touch. You know, I mean, again, not Jude Bellingham's fault, but and it was different ownership. But as soon as he left for Borussia Dortmund, they retired his shirt. So I think that's the least you can do for Trevor Francis.
Oh yeah, and something I saw in the news is also that it sounds as though the new Blues board had been in discussions with Trevor Francis as to how they could involve him in the club. So he'd obviously been in their thoughts, and it would be good if they can think of an appropriate tribute for them. And I don't know. I'm sure they will think of something decent, because so far they're showing that they've got a bit of nerve. So let's hope they can do something good. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, it's been nice to talk to you, Kym. As I say, we wish the circumstances were different, and I'm sure it'll be emotional for the first home game of the new season in just a couple of weeks' time. And so we're going to be doing something on this show at the start of the season. It's going to be sort of more fun than what we've talked about right now. But it was important that we marked the passing of a great player in Trevor Francis, who left his mark on a football club and on a city. There's no doubt about it. Kym Smith, commentator for BHBN Radio on home matches at Birmingham City. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.